I wanted to go live briefly and read a rather remarkable think piece that was published on the website of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, no less, by Angus Deaton, who is the Dwight D. Eisenhower Professor of Economics and International Affairs and Emeritus at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs and the Economics Department at Princeton University. Angus Deaton is also the 2015 recipient of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. And this piece, which I'm linking to it in the description of this video, you can read it for yourself. And given that it's published on the website of the IMF, this means that it's elite to elite, an elite to elite publication. So it is not written for the Wall Street Journal, where it would be picked up and read by hundreds of thousands and potentially millions of people of their daily readership, etc. No, this is on the IMF. So usually no one, of course, reads the IMF except for people who work with other such think tanks and organizations as the IMF, the World Bank, and perhaps the European Union. So this is read by people in Washington, in Brussels, in London, the decision makers, not the general public. So I wanted to draw attention to this. Published in March. I'm not sure there's a date anywhere, but this was published just a couple of days ago, really, maybe a week ago, of this year. And again, this is not just anyone, this is Angus Deaton. And I, of course, even though I have a bit of a background in economics, I cannot really keep up with someone as Angus Deaton. But what I have been trying to articulate for years now, and you find a playlist of this in the description of this video, I've been trying to articulate a completely different way of approaching economics based on scholae, on this ancient Greek concept that is only poorly translated as leisure, but should much more be translated perhaps as the dwelling ground, the measure of sufficiency that must be in place before. The economic problem is fundamental to everything. The economic problem is replicated on all sides, be it left, right, Marxism, communism, Keynesianism, capitalism, etc. And boils down, to put it simply, to the question of how the material problem can be solved. And this is there's a fundamental flaw, let's say, in this assumption, which is that there will come a point when we have enough. But as we can learn from Plato's dialogue, the Critias dialogue, without knowing intrinsically sufficiency itself, scholae itself, we will never arrive at a point when enough is enough. But I'm going to read this text, and I highly recommend that you read this text as well. And I'll comment as much as I can. As I said, I can't really comment on the too much on the economic theory that he addresses here. But it is really remarkable how honest he is and what kind of a shift there might be coming within elite circles. Questioning one's views as circumstances evolve can be a good thing. So Professor Deaton has to justify what he's about to say. Economics has achieved much. There are large bodies of often non-obvious theoretical understandings and of careful and sometimes compelling empirical evidence. The profession knows and understands many things. Yet today we are in some disarray. We did not collectively predict the financial crisis. I mean, the financial crisis now is 16, 17 years old. This is 2007. Really, it begins, and it turns into the euro crisis that made Greece suffer tremendously, and it's now 2024, and it takes 16 or 17 years to admit that we did not collectively foresee the financial crisis. Not only that, let's not forget the new economy. Remember when economists and people in finance in 1999 and around that time proclaimed that businesses no longer have to turn a profit, because thanks to the internet, it's enough to just have a website. As long as you have a .com, that will be enough in the future economy. And when I was younger, I studied economics in Italy. I had a professor who received his PhD from Harvard. This is how it works. You go to Harvard and Yale, and then you spread out to the smaller universities around the globe. So I studied PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics, so economia e scienze sociali in Italy. So economics, philosophy, politics, mostly focused really on hardcore economics with econometrics and statistics. So it's a Bachelor of Science in economics. I did heavy mathematical economics for 4 years in Italy. And I started in 2008, right in September, which is when the financial crisis was the hottest, really. And all of us, we were children of the crisis. We were worried about our future. And I remember also, because it didn't go away, right? It turned from the financial crisis in Europe, it turned into the euro crisis, and that turned into a legitimacy crisis of the European Union, that turned into the intense suffering of the Greek people, and at the mercy of Brussels, etc. So and I remember asking in 2010 at the university bar, this professor of mine, I won't mention his name, he was very successful and young, very smart, professor of economics with a PhD from Harvard, so top of his class, etc. And I asked him, why do we still learn some of these models, for example, the Phillips curve, which have proven to be not accurate when it comes to empirical data? Just a very basic question. And also given the financial crisis, so many of these models that we're learning about make no sense. They're flat. And he looks at me, and he was dead serious. He says, because it's the truth. So with this kind of dogmatism in economics, no wonder it takes them 17 years until one man is a gentleman enough to admit that we may have made mistakes. So we may have contributed, Professor Deaton admits, to the financial crisis, through an over-enthusiastic belief in the efficacy of markets, especially financial markets, whose structure and implications we understood less well than we thought. Recent macroeconomic events, admittedly unusual according to their own models, not unusual at all, have seen quarreling experts whose main point of agreement is the incorrectness of others. Economics Nobel Prize winners have been known to denounce each other's work at the ceremonies in Stockholm, much to the consternation of those laureates in the sciences who believe that prizes are given for getting things right. Well, this is, internal debates, etc. That shouldn't bother us too much. This kind of what economists have amongst themselves. But this is important. This sentence here, that they were over-enthusiastic in the belief in the efficacy of markets, especially financial markets. Now, let's not forget that not too long ago, and this is post-financial crisis also, the belief in derivatives even post-financial crisis, was that derivatives would generate or bring about a world that is without risk. Yeah? Derivatives are bets. So I take out insurance on my house, fire insurance, let's say, and someone can now bet on my insurance policy. And someone else can bet on that bet, and on that bet, and on and on and on it goes. Look at the derivatives, just the size, the volume of quote unquote money in bets that's out there. Impossible to pay back ever. Now, by making these many bets, which by the way is an old practice, so when a ship 500 years ago sailed from Venice to Persia to buy spices, let's say, or silk, this would, people would, in the harbor of Venice, would bet on the ships. There would be insurance policies and you could bet on them, etc. This was something that people did to make a bit of extra cash, and it was perhaps a bit of entertainment, etc. So derivatives in that sense are not that new. People make bets, that's what we do. But of course, the hyper-financialization of derivatives, and the hyper-financialization, by the way, also of just about anything, right? Your Airbnb room, your room so you can rent out on Airbnb, your car that become an Uber car, etc. All these companies that make no profit whatsoever. Airbnb makes no profit, Uber makes no profit, WeWork, a complete failure, valued at billions and billions and billions, and then worth nothing overnight, worth nothing to begin with, obviously. So there's lots of fraud that also goes on. This is, of course, something that Angus Deaton does not address because he doesn't want to lose all his respectability. There's lots of fraud that's built into a hyper-financialized system that we live under. Yeah, just this lack of honesty, to me, is astonishing. So, anyways, now he has found himself, as he says, changing his mind, which is wonderful. And he mentions here, for example, power. Now, of course, we have thinkers like Foucault and others who endlessly talk about power, but of course only for the sake of taking power themselves. But I would agree in general that power must be part of economic theory. So must money. Money must be part of economic models, and very often you'd be surprised money is not mentioned. Now, there's of course, he mentions here setting prices and wages, etc. Philosophy and ethics, and this is perhaps most important to the people here. He mentions, in contrast, the economists from Adam Smith and Karl Marx through John Maynard Keynes, Friedrich Hayek, and even Milton Friedman. That's funny. We have largely stopped thinking about ethics and about what constitutes human well-being, human flourishing, eudaimonia. We are technocrats who focus on efficiency. We get little training about the ends of economics, on the meaning of well-being. Welfare economics has long since vanished from the curriculum, or on what philosophers say about equality. When pressed, we usually fall back on an income-based utilitarianism. We often equate well-being with money or consumption, missing much of what matters to people. In current economic thinking, individuals matter much more than relationships between people and families or in communities. This is an astonishing admission. And again, this is elite to elite. It's not a think piece, not an opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the London Times. This is written. No one's supposed to read this, right? And no one reads the IMF website, except for a few freaks. So again, some tidal shift is about to come, but of course the danger is that, as he admits here, and I think I have great respect for Professor Deaton to be so honest and sincere and self-critical after such a tremendous career in the field. You have to be able, at his age, he's in his 70s, He he he's achieved more than most people will ever achieve in this field, and he is now at this age able and willing to critique himself, his approach, his entire world view. This is earth-shattering, perhaps, to him, you know. But what I fear, though, is that, as he admits here, that we are technocrats. Right? We are technocrats who focus on efficiency. I fear, though, that within elite to elite circles, who are mostly technocrats, is that once ethics, the ethical dimension becomes, they become conscious of it again. I fear that it'll just be a technocratic approach to ethics again, where ethics becomes a parameter for which optimization processes are put in place also, right? So this need not even be utilitarian ethics. This could be some watered down, wishy-washy, neo-Aristotelian ethics that is then introduced as a framework into the technocratic measures. So while this is extremely important, so you see, ethics is not just something we do or virtues. It's ethics is the very ground in which we dwell. That's ethos. And their economics cannot be separate from ethics. It's meaningless to have an oikonomia, a nomos of a household, of the house, separate from the ethos, the very polis, the common and public good, which by which we all can be in the first place. So I fear, while I see this is a very important step, I fear that what this will lead to is more technocratic measures that are then have slapped on the ethics label. So while this is to be welcomed, that there are quite obviously inner elite discussions going on these matters, or else this would not have been published, right? I mean, this doesn't, if you know, I mean, to say the obvious, this is not, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this look a bit better for you all. I'm not sure if this is possible. No, sorry, this is not very good. Okay, I hope you can read it anyways. So just to be clear, before something like this gets published, there are already discussions taking place. This is not just something that Professor Deaton just so comes to believe. There's already discussions happening at places like Princeton and others, in places like Washington and London and others, because they realize that something is afoot, that something is changing. And he also mentions, you should, if you scroll down a bit, he mentions here, this is incredible admission, I'm much more skeptical of the benefits of free trade to American workers, and am even skeptical of the claim, which I and others have made in the past, that globalization was responsible for the vast reduction in global poverty of the past 30 years. I also no longer defend the idea that the harm done to working Americans by globalization was a reasonable price to pay for global poverty reduction, because workers in America are so much better off than the global poor. I believe that the reduction in poverty in India had little to do with world trade. And poverty reduction in China could have happened with less damage to workers in rich countries if Chinese policies caused it to save less of its national income, allowing more of its manufacturing growth to be absorbed at home. So he's also then, I used to, maybe just to mention this, I used to subscribe to the near consensus among economists that immigration to the US was a good thing, with great benefits to the migrants and little or no cost to domestic low-skilled workers. I no longer think so. Economists' beliefs are not anonymous on this, but are shaped by econometric designs that may be credible but often rest on short-term outcomes. So there are incredible admissions here, and something that perhaps gives some indication about what is coming further down the pike. But I just want to come back to this here, to philosophy and ethics, because this is something I can say a few things about. I think, for example, that Friedrich Hayek has absolutely no ethics whatsoever. I mean, if he mentions here, yes, Hayek is not a utilitarian, but he is a crude libertarian individualist. there's a reason why Thatcher worked with Hayek, and Thatcher was the prime minister to say in the UK that there's no such thing as society. So to fall back on Hayek, to me, is rather remarkable. Hayek did believe that a great society could come about, but this would be a pure spontaneous order, nothing that could by any way be centrally planned. Of course, Hayek was very happy to work with, let's say, oligarchs, monopolists, and a few others, and he was also very happy to receive funds from them. Personally, he was also not opposed to order itself, no, but it would have to come about purely and spontaneously. Now, the funny thing about so-called neoliberal policies is, of course, that they are centrally initiated. Right? It's Thatcher's government that starts the privatization project. It's not as though the free market just springs up in this idiotic belief and then just does whatever is most efficient. No, it's the government determining centrally that we will now privatize this part of the train system, and we will call it a public-private partnership, which is a neat way of saying we will privatize profits and socialize losses. So we have the worst of both worlds, thanks to these private-public partnerships, which were centrally initiated. Centrally. There's no such thing as the free market. Every economy is planned. Literally every economy. The free market economy is centrally planned by the state. It is allowed for, it's allowed for. So, But more importantly, we get little training, he says here, by the ends of economics and the meaning of well-being. Welfare economics has long since vanished from the curriculum. Now, what hasn't vanished from the curriculum, and I was taught this, was public economics. Now, in public economics, and you can look this up, you can go to the relevant textbooks. In public economics, students around the world learn that and how politicians should be bribed. Politicians have opportunity costs, and their actual matrices. You use a certain matrix system by which you determine by how much to bribe a public functionary or politician. I'm not kidding. That's what students learn in public economics. I had to sit an exam figuring out in different exercises how to bribe politicians. This is what students learn in so-called public economics. Now, I wonder why, first of all, I remember none of my fellow students complaining about this. And said, I just wanted to mention this because maybe you've never studied economics, maybe you've never heard of this, but this is part of the curriculum. And welfare economics, we did have actually. It's not entirely true that it's completely cut from the curriculum. But again, welfare economics here is what we would be calling, quote unquote, neoliberal. So it's a question of how much do you have to pay people and so they don't starve, but they're just above average, or just above the poverty line, to get them back into work. So it's again these purely mechanistic ways of looking at the economy. The economy is a machine to them. The neoclassical economists look at the economy as an engine. You add a certain, you drive up unemployment to drive down inflation, for example. Okay. So there's absolutely a need for this kind of training, right, about the ends of economics and meaning of well-being. But it will not be enough to just look at Adam Smith, of all people, or Karl Marx, But instead, we need to go to the very foundations of oikonomia. We need to read again Plato and Aristotle. We need to understand something else to begin with. That the economic well-being, the flourishing of human beings, begins when we ground our being in skole, in the measure of sufficiency, in the very ground that lets us see what is sufficient. What we can see in our insane time is that no amount of money is ever enough. And we live in a debt-based system. The money that is out there is all based in debt. The fiat monetary system is a debt monetary system. And it means that ultimately Schopenhauer is right in this. Because Schopenhauer says that life is a business that doesn't cover its cost. And it can't. This economic system cannot cover its cost. It cannot cover its debt. It's at best, zero-sum game. So the situation is so bad, is so terrible, really, when it comes to economics and hyperfinancialization, etc., that within elite circles, this is now a topic. They have to address that they've lost it. They have to, and again, huge respect to Professor Deaton for being so honest about this. But I wonder if injecting just a little bit of different kinds of ethics will actually cut it. I don't think so. Because the issues are so fundamental that we would have to go back to the source of oikonomia, of ethics, to a degree that I wonder whether it's even possible, or how to get out of the situation which we're in. And it is really a terrifying situation, the economic situation. And we all know about this, that it's impossible for the young to buy a house if they don't inherit wealth from their parents. The insane debt cycle that students have to get into, especially in the English-speaking world. So again, I highly recommend that you read this, that you spread this article around, because this is elite to elite messaging. This is something that is not written for the general public. And the more people who read this, the better. You should start learning about our monetary system. If you want to understand the world, it's highly important to understand the monetary system, to understand at least the basics of the financialization that we are suffering under, and also how this is absolutely everywhere. Think of CO2 emission certificates, right, by which supposedly the environment, the planet will be saved. That's just a financialization of it. That's just a market. No environment will be saved by trading CO2 certificates. This is purely just about creating more and more sub-markets to keep kicking the can down the road. I don't have immediate solutions. Obviously, I'm not in the business of providing technical solutions, but what we rather need to do, the real revolution that has to happen, it's not really a revolution at all. It's a reformation. We have to reform our thought around what it means to have an oikonomia, to be ethically involved with one another. And this has to be grounded, as I said before, in skole. Yeah? So listen to my lectures. This will be very strange, perhaps, this way of thinking for some of you who've just stumbled upon this. And I have to say, it's quite remarkable. I have 70 people listening to this right now. I have no idea why. That's a lot more than usually. So there's quite a few people on Twitter listening. So if you're seeing this on Twitter, go to the YouTube live stream and click on the sorry, what is it? The playlist. Maybe listen to that, and if you can, share this around, and perhaps also try and support the work here on this channel, because I am genuinely trying to articulate what an oikonomia scolaire might look like for the next generations to come, that is beyond all the madness that we have been subjected to, and that is ultimately really, I think, born out of this fundamental misconception of the economic problem that is based in lack. All of this is based in lack and the fulfillment of lack, apocalyptic thinking, etc. So I hope that you learned a bit today, and if you did, I hope that you share this with others. So, thank you very much.